This is the first one, and we want to welcome Sylvain Charlebois, the food professor, joining us today, speaking with Ransom Hawley, Caddle CEO, and discussing Canada's inflated prices and its impact on the food industry. So I will kick it off to Ransom to start us off.
Great, thank you, Elise. You can hear me and see me? Just triple checking. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. It's a great banner you have there, Sylvain.
I don't know why I got it. I just can't remember. I think it was a sale there.
Yes, so if we want to jump to the next slide, Elise, as she had mentioned, I'm the CEO of Caddle. For those of you who aren't familiar, we only have 2 or 3 slides in this deck, just bringing you up to speed on the Caddle platform and what we do. And I will pass it over to Sylvain for a quick intro as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Ransom, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to join you, Ransom. This is our second webinar together. I think the last one was a little less than a year ago. A lot of things have changed. A lot to talk about for sure today. When it comes to prices and food affordability, those are topics we study heavily at the lab. So my name is Sylvain Charlebois. I'm the director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University in Halifax. I'm actually currently here in Tampa Bay, Florida. I'm actually a visiting scholar at the University of South Florida, studying supply chain management, which is a really important topic these days, and I suspect it is going to come up quite a lot over the next 60 minutes together. So thank you for inviting me again.
Of course, and I dusted off a button-up shirt, because normally I'm used to you wearing a tie. I thought I'd be maybe one behind you here, but
I know, yeah, I got casual on you without telling you sorry.
It's fine. I almost forgot how to do up buttons. Anyway, okay, let's jump in. Elise, we'll first touch on the agenda. I'll give you a quick overview of Caddle for those of you who aren't familiar, and for those of you who are, it'll be quite quick. Then we'll talk about the state of food inflation in Canada, the consumer attitudes and perceptions and realities. And there's some interesting data that we've collected very recently in 2 different waves that I'll touch on in a couple slides. But the way this, and of course, key takeaways, the way this webinar is going to work is, Sylvain, if you don't recognize him, just tune into CTV or any other Canadian news channels on any given day, and he'll probably be on there as an expert talking about things like inflation. So it really is a pleasure to have him here, and we've worked together for over the past year or so longer, and helped to collect data on topics like inflation. And so the data that we've derived in both September and January this month is what we're covering here, and some of those key changes.
Yes, before we get going, actually a few audience members said it's a bit hard to hear you, Sylvain. Can you maybe adjust your mic a little bit?
Can you, let me see here. Oh, 1 second. I don't think I have the right microphone. Can you hear me now?
There we go. That's much better.
Actually, my Yeti was on and my helmet was off. So there you go.
I see. Okay, perfect. Yes, definitely wanted to address that.
Thank you.
No
Perfect.
problem.
Even better. Okay, so what is Caddle? Caddle is a mobile-first data and insights platform. We operate exclusively within Canada. We have our own first-party panel, and we reward them for engaging with brands and sharing data in a number of different ways. We have the activity of our panel is quite large, anywhere from 3 to 8 times the size of other data and insights platforms within the Canadian market, and we track a number that essentially no other platform in our space tracks, which is daily active members, which is important because of making better decisions faster. It's a platform that was created to help the data and insights keep up with the pace of business that we're all operating at. In terms of the tools, in terms of the ways in which we can engage our panel members, video, stimuli, survey for this webinar, and most of what we do, it's a combination of video, image, stimuli, and survey. This webinar was based exclusively on an identical survey conducted in 2 different waves in September and January. We also have ongoing receipt collection from our members to help understand their item level purchase behaviors, and that is collected exclusively within grocery. And we have the ability to do other things like collect reviews, either customer experience or product reviews, as well as because everything is conducted through our first party panel, there's no farming that panel or collection out. We have the ability to re-engage. So as an example, any of the data that we've collected here, if we'd like to go back to those members who say that they're using a specific tactic or have said that they're going to shop at different retailers as a result of inflation, we can go back and do a follow-up study. It's quite easy for us to do that, and that's the way we've built the database. Again, to enable an iterative approach to research to make better decisions faster.
On that note, Ransom, if I may, I mean, the lab works very closely with Caddle. We've been working together for over 2 years now, and Caddle has been incredibly responsive and frankly quite consistent in its approach. The support that we get from Caddle has been nothing short of amazing, and we've been able to use a lot of the data that was provided by Caddle to publish in key academic journals, top journals from around the world. So we're unbelievably pleased with the partnership we have with Caddle.
It's been over 2 years. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, time flies.
Crazy.
It's almost as long as a pandemic, which is, both great and really, frankly, disturbing.
Yeah, well said. Okay, so that is the Caddle pitch. And of course, if you want to hear more about Caddle, you can certainly reach out, and there's some information at the end of the deck. But let's get into some of the data. First, we'll kick off with the methodology. We surveyed a representative sample of Canadians, and all of our data is Canadian specifically. And we did two waves, conducted in September 2021 and this month in January. We have over 10,000 Canadians, just over 10,000 per study, which is about our daily active rate. So again, ability to collect a lot of data very quickly from Canadians across the country. And so these were 2 pulse studies with the same questions. There's going to be slight changes made to this study for future waves, but we will be collecting this data quarter over quarter moving forward, just to track how Canadian shopping behaviors are changing, as this is it's almost a changing story daily.
Just jumping in, there is a typo on the screen. So that is supposed to say September 2021, not 2020.
Yes, nice catch, Elise. Yeah, so it's 3 or 4 months apart. These 2 waves are 4 months apart are run. All right, so let's jump in. So this study was a series of, I think it's less than 10 questions that we ran. Very straightforward, very simple. And that's a lot of what we do at Caddle is kind of the 20 questions or less. Some of the studies we do longer as well as longitudinal, but really simple pulses for Canadians to really weigh in and provide their feedback. So we'll kick off 2 slides, and then I've got some questions that I want to bounce off Sylvain. The first one being, are Canadians feeling the impact of food inflation? And so this is perception. Do consumers think that food is more expensive? And almost every second headline is about inflation. So take this with understanding that this is perception-based, but perception really is reality. And what you'll see here is that the vast majority of Canadians, this is broken down by generation, are seeing that food is more expensive than it was six months ago. You've got the January results as well as the net change. And what you'll see is with all of the data that we've collected on these slides, everything is increasing unfavorably for Canadians in terms of more expensive, increasing the tactics to try and save money. It really is there's the perfect storm here. So what you'll see is there are nuances within this. As a total, about 80% of 89% of Canadians think that food is more expensive than it was 6 months ago, as of the January 2022 stat. And you'll see some price sensitivity amongst the older that the consumer gets, the more aware they are of expenses of food increasing in price. But what you'll you'll see the younger generations, Millennial and Gen Z, are increasing at a faster rate from our September to January wave. The other thing to note, which will be, we will keep track of over, as this is a quarterly tracker, is Canadians are typically, I mean, most North Americans are typically more price sensitive in January given the holiday spending. So while this is a reality, I think the Q1, Q2, Q3 waves will help us normalize this data as well. But overall, you'll see the changes are big, but they're not that dramatic, especially when you look at something like Boomers and Gen X. So we'll jump on to the next slide, and then I've got a question for Sylvain. But I mean, really, to frame this up, as most of us are aware, and the theme throughout the deck is Canadians are really feeling pinched. And you know, when we first conducted this study in September, it was quite alarming. And you've really got the perfect storm of issues, from supply chain issues leading to inflation. Most recently, you've got Bank of Canada increasing its interest rates, almost weekly, if not more frequently, restrictions or challenges that drive even further supply chain issues and cost implications, like the recent cross-border trucking issues that we're seeing empty shelves on. That compounding, and with soaring housing prices, making housing unaffordable, are also driving more demand for rental for housing, and that's driving those rates up as well. It is, like I said, the perfect storm, and Canadians really responded in the vast majority that they're feeling this pinch. And the stat we have, which I think is a couple of months old now, Sylvain, but the average family of four will have to pay about $1,000 more for groceries in 2022. And that's quite a staggering stat, and as well as about 50% of Canadians cite that they can't afford a $1,000 emergency. So you've got this issue of no savings and lockdowns and inflation, increasing costs kind of at every front. So this is, it's quite alarming, and there's opportunities here for groceries and brands to help Canadians, which is good for business, it's good for share, and good for growth. But it's also I would say a once in a generation perfect storm of things that are happening that are severely impacting Canadians' consumer behavior. And it presents opportunity. It also presents a way to help Canadians in this difficult time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are challenges, and today you may have heard, Ransom, that the Bank of Canada has decided to keep its prime rate at the same level. Has not decided to increase, which is obviously good news for debt owners, people with mortgages and things like that. But I'm thinking about imports, and I look at some of the categories, vegetables, fruits. We do import a lot of food. We could actually see the dollar drop, and the buying power of importers could be impacted as a result. So I'm concerned about that right now for sure. But you're right, there are so many elements impacting food prices these days, and yes, a lot of fingers are pointed at COVID, and in particular Omicron. I mean, and you talk to leaders in the food industry as well as I do, Ransom, and you know this, that I mean, Omicron was really just a huge blow, because losing 15-20% of your staff all at the same time while you're dealing with perishable ingredients and you have to move things along will lead you to two things. It will slow things down, and you will waste more of your inventory. And that's kind of what's going on across the board. But at the end of the day, consumers will pay for that waste, will pay for that slowdown. And I'm sure that many listeners would have noticed that fresh products are not as fresh as they used to at the grocery store. And again, that's an indication that things are not going well. And that's going to last a while, unfortunately.
Yes, Yeah, I mean, based on the data we've seen, Sylvain, I hadn't seen that Bank of Canada news. It's not surprising. I think it's another blow that delaying that is at least going to maybe delay some potential implications that could create another draft in this storm. Okay. So when we asked about Canadians in terms of if they're seeing inflation, if they're paying more for groceries, we saw that breakout by generation, and about 9 out of 10 Canadians are noticing some form of increase in food specifically and groceries, and that's increased 3.2%. We then asked which categories that they're seeing are more expensive versus 6 months ago. You'll see the yellow areas are highlighted, and meat, and then in the coming slides we dig into meat a little bit, and then you'll see the net change. So overall, again, the same theme of that sensitivity is increasing, that perception of paying more is increasing from September to January, and it's broken out by primarily meat, which is 83%, followed by fruits and veggies, and then dairy. So I have a question for you, Sylvain. While this is a perception, as mentioned, perception is reality, how is this impacting brands and grocery stores, and what opportunities do you think it presents brands and retailers with this increasing perception reality from consumers?
Well, I mean, right now you're looking at a greater number of consumers who are becoming more frugal, who are coming into the grocery store. They'll be looking for deals. They'll be trading down, sideways. They may actually change their buying patterns from one section to another. And I'm thinking about produce, for example. I suspect that the freezer aisle will get busier as we go into 2022, because we do believe that produce and fruits, in light of what's going on at the border, in light of what's going on with Omicron, we do think that's going to be an area where we're going to see a lot of movement. Dairy, I'm actually I'm intrigued by your results, to be honest, because we haven't seen the worst in dairy. Next week, so as of February 1st, to produce cheese, yogurt, all of their products we eat in Canada will cost more. And so obviously, and Lactalis, just before the holidays, announced that it was going to increase prices by 15%. And so we don't know exactly what's going to happen in retail, but we are expecting major increases in that area. So are consumers going to stick to the brands that they're accustomed to? Are they going to trade down? Or, and this is the other interesting thing when it comes to proteins, are they actually going to be considering alternatives more so than before? And because alternatives right now in dairy in particular are often slightly more expensive than dairy products. But with this increase, we're expecting that the difference will be marginal. And so it's going to be interesting to see exactly how the consumer will be looking at dairy with much higher prices than say just 12 months ago.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, with the data we've collected in the past, I mean, you always get this say versus do dichotomy, where Canadians say that they want to buy green, they want to buy organic, they want to buy sustainable, but if the product is more expensive or it doesn't taste as good, then it doesn't translate at the shelf. So if some of these increases, they may drive behavior. I mean, of course, no better way to drive behavior changes than a little pressure on the wallet. But when they get to the shelf, if perhaps the reason for not converting to an oat milk or an almond milk, and that might be a bad example, but is on a cost per 100 milliliter basis, maybe that will
I got to tell you, Ransom, I mean, if you've looked at some of the prices recently, they're pretty competitive. Like oh, you just mentioned oat milk, which is something we actually make in Canada. And unlike almond milk, we don't make almonds and we don't produce almonds in Canada, but oat has a lot of potential and behaves well in coffee as well. So for people who are big fans of cafe lattes, they would have noticed that oat milk actually does behave well for baristas. So there's but oat milk is becoming affordable with that increase with dairy. So that's why we're really going to be looking at that particular category over the next 12 months and see how consumers are going to be shifting around between, are they really committed? And as you know, Ransom, consumption of fluid milk per capita has been going down for years now. And so will that actually accelerate the rhythm, the momentum, pushing people away from milk? We don't know.
Yes, and so in the, we can jump to the next slide, but in the next few slides we look at specifically in meat consumption, and I mean you're right, Sylvain. Now you have a peek at this deck before, but there, and in terms of changing behavior, so and the data from these studies and the reports from these studies will be available, but you've got this very alarming, or perhaps opportunistic stat where 89% of Canadians are saying that food inflation is outpacing their income, right? And that's driving these behavior changes that we'll see in some of the tactics that they're using. 60 of that pool of 10,000, but 63% of Canadians intend to change their food shopping habits, right? And what that means, some of the coming down. And then of that pie, 32% will actually change where they shop. So, 32 of 63 of what that translates to is about 20%. So 1 in 5 Canadians from national 10,000 response across the country, 1 in 5 Canadians will change where they shop as a result of this, which is, I mean, that represents.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, right? And a big opportunity for retailers to, as you'll see in some of the key takeaways, to really be the.
I mean, one of your earlier surveys did indicate that a lot of people are switching grocery stores. They may just because of COVID. I mean, a lot of people actually did change grocery stores because they knew there was a case of COVID in the first year of the pandemic. But once you choose to change stores, it's hard to get them back again. And people are moving. There are few people in Toronto, fewer people in Montreal. People are moving to the countryside. The work from home phenomena is real. It's measurable now. We can see it. Employers are encouraging employees to work at least 4 or 5 days a month at home now, on average. So it really is going to, loyalty is under siege. I'll be honest with you, not only in the grocery store, but locations are being revisited by most consumers. Is that really the place I want to continue to shop on a regular basis or not? And there's a lot of things that will trigger a change in behavior.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone on this webinar knows at least a handful of people that have changed where they live, right? Which represents an opportunity to potentially change where they shop in and of itself. And then you layer on top of that these inflation, all these other challenges that we mentioned that are putting pressure on Canadians. I mean, I mentioned before, I don't think it's dramatic, but it really is a once in a generation opportunity to. Right, you've seen these small single-digit percentage, fraction of a percentage point increases in trying to steal share with these changes, and you've got the meteoric rise of platforms like Instacart and Click and Collect and things like that. We've got a quarterly Instacart study that 1 in 10 Canadians uses Instacart, and within that study, 40% of those Instacart shoppers had tried a new store, not necessarily grocery, but had tried a new store as a result of being on
through
that
Instacart.
Through Instacart, because it's just so easy. I mean, you can do it from
Yeah.
So
you don't need to know where the store is.
That's right. It's going to be delivered right to your door, right? So it
That's interesting.
And it's also quite easy to price compare. And you'll see later in this deck, Canadians are very savvy of that as well. Okay. So we are still on pace, by the way. This is meant to be more of a discussion. We've got a few slides, so I would get an angry text from Elise telling me to hurry up if we were. So don't worry about that.
And sorry to interrupt you once in a while. And yeah, I've never seen this deck before, so it's kind of exciting. I like to see things for the first time.
Look at that. So, I mean, this is interesting, right? We've got potential shifts away from so increases. I mean, 15% is I doubt Canadians are seeing a 15% increase in their income, which we saw with was it 89%? Yeah, I'd say Canadians say inflation is outpacing their income. So there's changing behavior, and we asked Canadians this, in these two periods if they were changing their meat purchases over the past 6 months and these habits, and about 1 in 2 Canadians are reducing the amount of meat they consume as a result. And again, we know Canadians from the studies that we've conducted want to reduce their income, whether it be a weekday vegetarian or a flexitarian. This is, again, you either tax something or charge more for it to put pressure in general on a wallet, and that will ultimately change behavior most effective way. But this is it's a staggering stat, and as the real impact, because there is a bit of a lag, continues to show up at the shelf, we think we'll see this increase.
Yeah, no, the meat counter economics were tricky in the last 12 months for sure. But when you look at the meat trifecta, I don't know if all meat products should be treated as equals. And I'm thinking about beef here. I think beef. I mean, we saw beef prices went up on average, I think 17% in 2021, which really spooked consumers. And you saw really beef being impacted by what was going on with prices. Chicken did go up a lot, like 13%. But people are committed to chicken. I mean, and chicken remains a very cheap protein. Along with pork. Based on the data we're looking, we haven't seen consumers walking away from chicken, pork particularly, but beef, absolutely. Beef is highly vulnerable to what you're talking about for sure.
Yes. Okay, if we can jump to the next slide, Elise. All right, so we touched on, I briefly kind of foreshadowed the Canadians being savvy, and whether we've got some data on shrinkflation, and this is data really around consumers understanding the prices they're paying at shelf. And this number was relatively constant period over period, where about 9 out of 10 Canadians cite that they know how much they should be paying for food products before entering the grocery store. And I remember back when I was working at a CPG company, we were evaluating price increases, and some of the conversations were around, this is an amount that we think Canadians may not notice at shelf, right? And there was, this idea, and this number, rewind 7-10 years ago, I would argue that it would be quite a bit lower. I mean, Canadians have always been savvy. They've always, as a percent purchased on deal, over-indexed versus other countries. But I mean, make no mistake, if you're taking an increase at shelf, and we'll touch a little bit on shrinkflation as well, if you're taking an increase at shelf, Canadians are going to notice. And they're very savvy, and more savvy now, especially as inflation is a topic, like I mentioned earlier, that's being covered in kind of every other headline.
I'll be honest with you, I'm a little bit surprised by the 91%. That's pretty incredible. You're really seeing, you're right, absolutely. The Canadian consumer is savvy, but they're becoming more strategic, That's what we're noticing. They will look for options. They will strategize before going to the grocery store. Once they're in the grocery store, they're getting information. They're getting educated about what's going on. They are aware that last week's visit won't be the same as this week's visit because prices will change. And frankly, this is just the beginning, folks, because I actually do see the day in the very near future where we're going to see some real-time pricing in a grocery store. You're seeing it in Europe. You're seeing other parts of the world, like from 1 hour to another, your oranges may be priced differently depending on of the volume of purchases or the inventory that the retailer would have access to, just to basically create this balance. Seeking that balance between supply and demand is an obsession for grocers. Can you imagine if you can tweak in real-time prices so you can stimulate demand or push demand away, so you can actually make sure that you always have shelves that are stocked, which is a big issue right now. Making sure that you actually have stuff to sell. Empty shelves don't sell. It's just bad for business. So they want to make sure that they have enough stuff on shelves, even if they have issues with the supply chain, even if they have issues with the border or snowstorms or whatever is thrown at them.
Yes. And this 91% as well, I mean, it is declared, and of course it varies by category. I mean, we've done studies in the past where we are looking for recall on specific categories and what they purchased. And if you look at something like a pesticide, infrequent purchase, but high need and reactive to kill an infestation, that the actual price versus what they think they paid is quite different. But overall, I mean, the key takeaway is Canadians are well aware and becoming more savvy with the pricing at shelf. So there's if and when you take price, it will be noticed. And so this leads into different ways, and this in the next slide we'll cover it as well. Different ways that Canadians are tactics they're using to save money. And not surprisingly, following a budget, using their phone to check prices with apps like Reebee and Flip, calculators to check their basket, check their prices, make sure they're staying on. And those, as you see here as well, those are increasing in terms of tactics that Canadians are using. And if we go to the next slide as well, we've got what Canadians are doing to save money. We talked about some flyer usage, enjoy tonight, coupons, switching to private label, and you'll see the orange bar is the January wave of the data collected, and across the board, the tools that Canadians are using are increasing. So they're using their Swiss Army knife of ways that they can save, and knowing some people at Reebee Flip, I mean, it is these types of counter linear, what's the right term here, but when times are tough and Canadians are being squeezed, they tend to see quite growth on their platforms, and it is they do have an opportunity to really help Canadians, because they do make it quite easy to create a list and search for prices, and more Canadians are doing that because quite frankly they're forced to.
Well, the one area, this is great. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Consumers are absolutely looking for ways to save. The one aspect of this survey that I think will merit a more granular approach, I guess, is the enjoy tonight sort of aspect of saving money. And what I mean by that, there's a lot of focus on food rescuing right now. We have apps, Food Hero, Flash Food, there's Too Good to Go. I mean, those are apps that people can use to repurpose food, to rescue food. I actually think that in months to come, because of what we're seeing right now with inflation, with prices, that segment, that market will grow. And I call it food rescue. It's inspired by Second Harvest in Toronto. They're food rescuers for people in need. But I actually think that consumers who can afford to buy their own food will want to become more and more food rescuers. But there are different ways to do that. One way would be to buy more Enjoy Tonight deals, but also there are these apps, and I suspect there'll be more options to come.
Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned before as well some of the shifting, especially with empty shelves, shifting to the frozen section of the store, whether it be frozen fruits or veggies or other. And it's something that we'll be keeping a close pulse on, because we saw this at the beginning of the pandemic, this kind of safety stocking your pantry, and that mass outage of toilet paper. And what we found when we had a weekly COVID tracker is that Canadians, for the most part, about 12 months after the pandemic, were still holding some form of safety stock, safety pantry. And now, as we're seeing all of these images emerge, and I haven't seen them yet, but
Did you guys measure over like a number of days of survival without going to the grocery store when people were keeping?
have a duration of which their safety stock, and I think it was a couple months.
Couple of months. Oh my God.
The product. So things, right? I mean, dry pasta, canned goods,
Right.
frozen foods, meats, things that they can stock in their freezer, and of course, safety stock of toilet paper and paper towel.
I think, I mean, the March 20th, 2020's legacy will be that. I think more and more people will be planning in advance. They'll have some sort of an emergency stock at home of food they can use. But back in March of 2020, it was shortages were demand induced, really, because you
Yeah.
saw like a sector, food service, shut down, and that demand shifted over to retail. And in retail, you saw some panic buying. So obviously, shortages were just all over the place. This time around has nothing to do with the consumer. We're looking at supply chain issues, and again, I suspect it will entice people to think differently about stocking at home in
Yes.
case of an emergency.
Yeah, so you think about going to the store and not being able to purchase and seeing that picture of these empty shelves, and then going the next time you shop. So we'll keep a pulse on it, but likely Canadians will perhaps pick up something else in case they can't
Yep.
get it on the shop. So we'll keep a pulse on that, but likely consumer behavior will mirror, for a very different reason, but will mirror back in March 2020. Okay, so Lisa, if we can jump to the next slide, that would be great. So that slide did touch on the different tactics that Canadians are using. I mean, I think the word desperation is not far off in terms of where Canadians are being pinched and how inflation is impacting their wallets, and many Canadians are feeling financially unstable. And as I mentioned before,
sorry, Ransom, to interrupt. I just want to throw at you a piece of data. So when you look at, because you're talking about perceptions, because that's kind of what we're measuring here, but the reality is that they are falling behind. Since 2021, early 2021, if you look at wage increases, it's 2.4% or something in Canada. But when you actually factor in inflation, food inflation in particular, people are falling behind by -2 since the beginning of 2021, more than a year ago. So absolutely, because wages are going up 2.4%, 2.5%, but now the food inflation rate is now at 5.7%. So
right.
people are absolutely falling behind for sure.
Yes. Yes. So scary times for the vast majority of Canadians. And although, people on this webinar may not be feeling the pinch like perhaps other Canadians, this does certainly represent an opportunity, as mentioned, to help as well as to capitalize. So you can do good and do well at the same time during this time. Okay, so we talked about inflation. We talked about consumers being savvy in terms of what they're paying at shelf, and so shrinkflation. And for those of you who aren't familiar, it's a change in the product size or volume or quantity for a similar price. So basically, baking in a price increase by keeping the price the same or potentially shrinking the product. So that is of course, a tactic that can be leveraged. But Canadians are savvy of that as well. But 77% of consumers have noticed a reduction in the product size, volume, quantity. Again, this does vary depending on the category. But the key takeaway is that Canadians generally will notice something like that as well. So there's no easy way to take price.
But would they walk away from a brand if they notice?
Yes,
My
and
my
that
guess is that I mean CPG companies know this. I mean you'll upset a consumer. You're more likely to upset a consumer with higher prices than with shrinkflation. You may actually upset the consumer if they notice, uh, but I'm not sure they actually would walk away from the brand. Interestingly, Ransom, because I've been following shrinkflation for well over a decade now, but in the last 6 months, I actually did notice of two major CPG companies admitting that they're doing it. Like it's this, Ransom. It's a taboo subject. Nobody wants to talk about it, but
right.
it's out there, and your numbers are telling the story. People are noticing. People aren't duped by shrinkflation anymore. It was really interesting to me to see two. I won't name them. But there are two CPG companies on record talking to the Canadian press saying, yes, it's something we're doing, absolutely, and that we're doing it because we want to serve the public. We want to protect our brands.
Sure. Yeah,
Interesting.
very interesting. Hmm. And to your question around what does an increase in price, what does a decrease in size, what does that do to the consumer at shelf or on the on the digital shelf if they're shopping through a platform? The short answer is it varies by category, and it will also vary by period depending on Canadians and what's important and what's not, just because of how quickly things are changing.
Yeah.
We
And
do.
I mean, 5 years ago, sorry, Rod, 5 years ago, I was getting questions. Oh my God, shrinkflation is wrong. It's fraudulent. No, it isn't. It isn't. The consumer has all the information the person needs at the point of purchase. You got the grams, you got the price per 100 grams, you got the price per 100 milliliters. It's all there. It's all, and the volume is actually on the package. Companies aren't misleading the public with shrinkflation. It's a packaging strategy. It's the strategy. So that's
Yes.
how I see it. But now I'm not getting that question anymore. I can't remember the last time I got the fraud question on shrinkflation. Don't remember.
Hmm. So, and given, I know we talked a couple of days ago around just the amount of coverage that you've had and the work you've done in this space. From a brand grocery or CPG perspective, increase in price or decrease in size, what do you think is the right tactic if supply chain is really dictating an increase?
I think. I suspect a lot of people who are listening in are fully aware of the pressures. I mean, you tend to see more shrinkflation cases when input costs go up, and that's exactly what happened in the last 12 months. It's costing more to make food, to buy the ingredients. So what are you going to do? My suggestion, I see nothing wrong with shrinkflation. It's just how you use it. And I'll give you an example of how you could use it. You play around with units, the size of unit, like the bite size, for example. There is one company out there doing it right now. I won't name that company, but there are cookies out there. There used to be 15 cookies in a package. They went up to 18 with the same volume, same number of grams. But instead of 15, it's 18, but cookies are smaller. I'll bet you Ransom in a year from now, they'll go back to 15 with smaller cookies.
Yes.
That's a smart way to do it. Over several months, over a couple of years, you basically allow the market to adapt itself to this, well, let's put it this way, new product. And the other argument that perhaps companies should be using is waste. We buy too much food. That's why consumers waste a lot of food. And so shrinkflation in some way could be seen as a strategy to help Canadians to reduce the amount of waste they generate at home. Maybe some people may not accept that as a sound argument, but that's high. I mean, people are focused on the planet. People are focused on resources. I would argue that shrinkflation could help consumers waste less food. You're not buying it, are you?
I, I mean, you're not wrong. It was years ago where we did a campaign at the company I was working for, because Canadians on a per capita basis waste a lot of food, throw out a ton of food. And it was storage containers and storage bags to help them, save and preserve their food more. So it is interesting. I mean, Canadians do waste a lot of food. I don't know if the average Canadian will buy that story as we're helping you, but
they won't. No, they won't. So, but it's got to be done at the right time and the right way. I haven't figured out how to do it, but I mean, I don't think, I think it's unfair to expect the industry to defend itself. I've always seen shrinkflation as a strategic option to defend market share. That's all it is.
So I agree, and we are running a series of daily surveys that if anyone on this call is interested in seeing them, happy to provide them to you at no cost. And there's a number of categories are being covered, and for each category, we ask about COVID implications, we ask about private label, we ask about brand loyalty, what consumers would do if they go to find a product in that category at shelf, if they'll leave or go somewhere else or shift to a different brand. So understanding what the right tactics are, this will be the only plug here. It's quite easy for us to identify a large representative sample of Canadians who shop your category, and perhaps even by brand, and understand what the best tactic is, because it will widely vary. And I mean, a price increase may be the best tactic, maybe the easiest tactic because of loyalty being so high in the category. But that is an interesting point, because any sort of pricing elasticity studies that have been conducted, I mean, really any time longer than the recent 6 months, you could argue even sooner, you need to take with a grain of salt, especially as things are changing so quickly. So, and that really is the nature of our platform, is to be able to make those decisions and get near real-time data. That's the only plug there, Sylvain.
We'll take it. We'll take it.
Yeah. So we've got some key takeaways, and then we've left time here for any questions that you have for myself or Sylvain. Anyone who's attended this, there is going to be some contact information, and you've received some emails as well. If there's anything that we can provide, if there's anything that we can pull, our daily survey, we run these daily surveys, 5 questions every day. If there's something that we can help you with and mine our historical data, or if there's a category that you'd like to cover that we can slot into a future daily survey, it's something we'd love to extend to our webinar attendees. So there's really 5 key takeaways here that I'll run through, and if there's anything you'd like to add to any of these points, Sylvain, feel free to jump in. But we touched on this being really the perfect storm, which doesn't quite apply here, but you think about a Warren Buffett quote of being greedy when others are fearful, and fearful when others are greedy. And while that relates more specifically to investment, I mean, here this massive shift and change, and 1 in 5 Canadians saying that they will change where they shop, and platforms making it easier to change where you shop, and data supporting that Canadians are a large percentage of Canadians are trying new retailers. This does represent a once in a generation chance and an opportunity to capitalize, but as mentioned to help Canadians through this difficult time. And perception is reality. And Sylvain, I appreciate you shared some hard data in terms of, we get 89% of Canadians saying that inflation is outpacing their income, and the data supports that. Right? And be interesting to track that as well. But again, we'll be running this quarter over quarter, and feel free to reach out to get those results. We'll be happy to share them and make them available to any brand partners. And really, feeling the pinch, it is more like a body slam, and it is accelerating. And these issues that Sylvain, you're covering on an almost daily basis. I think you had mentioned how many webinars did you do in the past month or appearances? I think it was a couple a day you were averaging or something.
Yeah, no, it was busy in the fall for sure. Things have calmed down in January. I think this is my fourth in January or fifth. Uh, I mean, basically, we do a lot of like a private chats. Companies do call in to get get a briefing of anything. I do a lot of fireside chats these days. It's less prep because there's so much going on right now. I mean, we could do a webinar tomorrow. We'll talk about different things with the same material. It's
Yeah.
just it's insane. It's just insane. The landscape is shifting hourly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The third point is being the white knight, and we've kind of pulled this thread throughout the presentation today. Understanding how consumers are changing their behaviors, and this tracker is quite simple, and it is at a macro level. But overall, Canadians are citing that they will change their behaviors in a number of different ways and in a number of different tools, kind of using their Swiss Army knife of tactics and platforms that are available to them to really help them save money, because vast majority of Canadians can't afford to spend $1,000 more a year on groceries as a family of four. So understanding your consumers and what they're doing, how they're shifting and changing, that really can represent an opportunity here. And at a macro level, we can help. And of course, we can also double click and go into any cohort, shopper, brand loyal consumer and provide you with more data.
I think it's important to keep in mind that the market has changed since the start of the pandemic, and frankly, 2 years in, it will have created habits. People are much more domesticated. At first, people hated to be home. Now, people actually are arguing to stay home a little bit more for a variety of reasons. And when you're home, your relationship with food completely changes. And if you're a grocer or if you're a processor, you have to think about that highly domesticated consumer compared to just 2 years ago. Yeah, it's really amazing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I much prefer to come to the office because I can manage my snacking behavior. And I have very little self-control when it comes to chips. So brands winning at shelf, I mean, supply chain pressures, they are a reality. And I think knowing that Canadians have a very high IQ in terms of understanding what they're paying for products, if prices do change, they are aware of it for the most part, as well as understanding shrinkflation and if products are changing in size. Of course, that does vary. But what this means is you need to be very strategic as a brand in terms of when you're taking these prices. And having a close pulse on what your competition is doing, what's happening with private label, because I think timing will be everything in terms of when this hits. And certainly, at least from what we're seeing and how price sensitive Canadians are, it could make the difference between winning and losing in 2022. And lastly, don't stop now. As evidenced in September and January, we will continue to collect this data quarter over quarter. And if there's other interesting data points that we want to pull in, we can certainly layer that in as well. If you have some feedback, the next wave is running in April, so there's still time to impact that. But really understanding, because things are changing so rapidly, and you saw across the board, I mean, overall, the theme was Canadians are looking for more ways to save, albeit January is a more sensitive time for Canadians. Understanding these changes are going to be pivotal and key in terms of winning share in 2022. But I think about my time when I was at a CPG company for about 7 years. This is the biggest opportunity that we've seen, and then working with CPG companies over the past 7+ years, this is the biggest opportunity to win as a retailer, as a brand, and knowing what's happening at shelf and knowing what consumers are doing and how that behavior is changing is going to make the difference between winning and losing.
Absolutely, and we're all learning how important supply chain management is, and I think a lot of companies are also understanding that. Well, I suspect that companies knew that. It's just right now you're dealing with a more nervous consumer, and so they need to be reassured. I'm out there trying to reassure the heck out of everyone every single day these days, but you are dealing with a more nervous consumer, and so who should they trust? And frankly, I gotta say, the food industry has currency when it comes to reassuring. I actually do think that if they can hear from people in the food industry, you know what, we're going to be fine, and these are the things that we're doing, and we're innovating, we're doing different things. I think the public will actually appreciate that.
Agreed. Agreed. Okay, so let's open it up to questions. Elise?
Yes, actually, I wanted to go through a few housekeeping items and final thoughts from Ransom and Sylvain. Just being mindful of time, I don't think we'll dive into questions today. I do see some coming in through the questions panel. We are sending a follow-up email with a takeaway deck that has even more insights than what we went through today. So definitely look out for that email. And if you have any burning questions, you can just reply to that email. It will be coming from me, Elise, at caddle.ca. And here on the slide, we also wanted to let you know about our next webinar in February. That's going to be all about the Amazon Prime Shopper 2.0. So if you were with us last year in January, we did Amazon Prime for the first time, and we've been doing a quarterly tracker for this. So now we're presenting kind of a take two of what we've found out in the last year. So that's coming up. If you have any specific questions on Caddle, you know, how you can work with us, you can reach out to Ransom or Colleen, our VP of Insight Solutions. Both emails are on the screen, so you can reach out to them directly as well. So thank you, everyone. There was 121 of you on the line today. So a really great start to 2022. And before we jump off the webinar, any final thoughts from Ransom and Sylvain?
If there are any questions that we didn't get to for myself or Sylvain, feel free to email them to me, and if we need to, I can loop in Sylvain and we can respond to them. So yeah, I want to make sure that everyone who attends gets the value out of this, as well as feel free to take us up on the offer of accessing our daily survey data and even providing topics to influence future daily surveys. We're happy to provide you with the report. You know, we really want to be a resource for our partners, clients who aren't partners yet. This is a very interesting time, and it's an exciting time to be part of something like this as a company like Caddle.
Absolutely. Yeah, so thank you very much again for inviting me. Thank you for joining. And Ransom, it was great to talk to you again. And we have yet to meet in person. We're going to have to do that in 2022 at some point.
Yeah, well, you're in Tampa Bay, right? I mean.
Well, I'm back in the country in June, so I'm sure at some point we'll meet. Maybe in Toronto, close by. I'm sure we'll meet.
Or the East Coast. I was saying I'd never turned down a trip to the East Coast or Florida, especially in the deep rain.
Clam chowder, Halifax, June. There you go.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sylvain.
All right.
And
yes,
thank you.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Ransom. Thank you, Sylvain. Thank you, everyone who's attended. Once this webinar ends, you will get a survey right away with, I think, 5 questions about this webinar. If you can take 2 minutes to fill that out, that helps us out a lot with the topics we will be doing for our future webinars. So thank you, everyone, for joining, and we will see you in February.